Hi, this is Brent Skousen, the youngest son of W. Cleon Skousen. What you're about to hear is a live recording of a university lecture by W. Cleon Skousen as he taught his Old Testament course. We really are fortunate to have these recordings, although at the time they weren't anticipated to be released publicly. As these lectures were recorded live, they are unscripted and unedited. You will feel as though you are actually there. If you are following the Come Follow Me curriculum of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, we have tried to coordinate each lecture with this week's lesson, although there may be some overlap. For those interested in the text Brother Skousen and the students are using, it is published as The First 2,000 Years, written by W. Cleon Skousen, and is available at bookstores or online at skousen2000.com. Now sit back and join us in the classroom of W. Cleon Skousen. Enjoy!
Let's see now. Mike, where are you? I want to tell about our... Oh, there you are. Tell us a little bit about this picture, will you? I'm going to pass it around. This is very well conceived. And if you'll pass it around here, and all up and down here, then down to the center, and then up here, and we'll let the rest of you see it on Tuesday. Appreciate that very much. Yes. Yeah, based upon the dimensions indicated in the scripture for the ark, the height, the breadth, the length, and then it says in the Book of Mormon that the barges were miniatures of this, that the Jaredites used. So you put it all together, and this is what he came up with. This is the same kind of a structure that the artist's conception is very similar to this after seeing the structure that's up on Mount Ararat. That conception is similar to this. And Tuesday, everything else being equal, I'm going to have an excellent film for you on the flood, and I think you'll really enjoy it. Okay. Cubit is 18 inches. Actually, they had a different lengths, 21 inches, 24 inches. So for my measurements, I always take the minimum of 18. No cubit was any less than 18. Yes, they often use it from the elbow to the tips of the finger, and that, of course, depended upon each king, who was the cubit measurement. So I took the very shortest cubit that we have any word of so that we would be sure and have the minimum. Nobody could say we were exaggerating. And you see, this ship turned out to be about as large. It has a displacement of about 50,000 tons, and that's a very big ship. And now that we understand a lot about genetics and DNA, which we formerly didn't understand, and found out that you could take two animals and you have in them potentially a host of species that belong to that cat family, for example, or that horse family. You can actually get them so far apart that they can't interbreed anymore as a species. And they'll all come out of those same two parents in a given number of generations. DNA is one of the most fascinating studies of genetics that we've broken into in recent years. So we're moving now into the flood epic, which is denied by many people, including some LDS scientists. They just can't believe that it could have occurred. And we have the famous Apostle Peter saying to the people, can you believe it? In the latter days, they won't even believe in the flood anymore. Can you imagine that? All drawing their breath. Josephus said in his day, anybody could go up and see the ark. And he said it was on Mount Ararat. And when Marco Polo came along, he said it was on Mount Ararat. And people started stumbling into it every few years if they had the wherewithal to climb it, get up on the top of the mountain. So we'll be telling you a little bit about that here in the not-too-distant future. And if Dr. Crawford comes to see me, which he hopes he can do in the next month or so, I'll have him speak to the class. Right. Well, through the ice, these timbers are about 140 feet long, each timber. There are no trees for hundreds of miles around this place. And what is a structure of those dimensions with all these rooms in it doing up there 13,500 feet above sea level? I mean, that's 1,500 feet above temp. I mean, you don't go up there for just a weekend lodging, you know. So when I introduced Dr. Crawford and his friends to President Smith, Joseph Fielding Smith, he said to them, well, don't be surprised if it is the Ark. But nobody knows for sure. We just know there's a tremendous structure up there encased in ice that hasn't been seen out of the ice since about 1938. We have one good hot year. You see, the water all melts away, then you get to see it. So these scientists wanted permission to go up and melt the ice so it could be seen. And the Russians chased them off because that mountain looks right down on Russia, right across the valley. So Everything in due time. If it did turn out to be the ark, it would really shatter a lot of theories. Number one, it would demonstrate that the church was right and basic scholars of the Bible were right in assuming that the flood was universal, not just some canyon or valley, and would show that the ship could have been that high. 13,500 feet means that there would have had to have been a universal flood to put it up that high. And might restore confidence in some of the cynics and those that have little faith and have difficulty being able to believe the Lord when he says, I did it. And Noah says, and I saw it. Believe me, it was for real. But Peter says, believe it or not, in the last days they will deny. The great flood even. And that seems so stupid back in those days. They couldn't think that we would be that stupid. Just couldn't imagine it. But we are. I'm speaking of our generation. And the intellectual world ridicules the flood as being an impossibility. Now I want to share with you some thoughts and some ideas that will give you an appreciation of how critical our own time is. Because when Enoch saw his great revelation of the latter days, he only saw what John saw and Ezekiel saw and Zechariah saw, and Adam had seen it before him. The prophet Lehi was allowed to see it, then his son Nephi asked to be allowed to see it and was able to see it. And they saw that we had a tremendous opportunity, but so that we wouldn't be prejudiced, none of them told us how it was going to turn out, but they saw how it was going to turn out. So you and I are at the crossroads. We're exactly like the people of Nineveh. We have the prophets telling that if we go one way, we will avoid what definitely is in the computer if we keep going the way we're going. Now, the Lord set up the Constitution specifically so that a city of Enoch society could exist in it. It would be sufficiently free of any economic control from a central source so that you could set up a city of Enoch society without interference from the outside. That is almost gone. That possibility has almost disappeared from our society. We are so far off the foundations of our original Constitution that the possibility of saving it now is really gossamer and thread-like. And you can't awaken the people for a very simple reason. Why do you think it's difficult to get people concerned about the fact that freedom, as the founding fathers envisioned it, has almost disappeared? Unless what? They'll take the responsibility if something exists, but if it doesn't exist, it's difficult for them to face up to it. What is that? What's the little thing that triggers people into going forward? If they're doing well and prospering, they just couldn't care less. And one of the most dramatic examples of it is occurring this week as a big fight is going on in Congress concerning whether or not our cities and states should be federalized. Now, the reason that I wanted to share this with you is because the Lord said when the Constitution was set up, if it's more or less than this, it's bad. In other words, I won't be able to do my work. If you get more or less than this, it will be bad. Now, what he meant by this was, the founding fathers, I'm just going over Madison's notes on the Constitutional Convention now. And Madison's notes say we must avoid anarchy where there's no government and avoid this terrible oppression of human beings where there's too much government. We must somehow find this spot. And they did find it. And the Lord said, now this will make you the most prosperous nation on earth. You'll be the most powerful and the freest if you just don't lose the formula. And one of the very first people to start diminishing the formula was Alexander Hamilton, then Thomas Jefferson, and they knew what they were doing, but it was for such a good cause. Now, that's actually how we began to disintegrate and go toward collectivism. We had a chance to buy the whole center of the United States for $15 million from the French. And so they came to Jefferson and said, get it, buy it. We said, I don't have the authority. Nobody's going to object. It's a bargain. Grab it. Well, he said, we really ought to have an amendment. I ought to be authorized to do it. I shouldn't just do it, they said, go on, grab it. He did, and it was one of the most popular things he did, and he always felt badly about it. And it was afterwards used as a precedent for what is called the strong president to do things he's not authorized to do. Not that he couldn't be authorized, but the Constitution provided for a machine to go through to do it. Alexander Hamilton came along, and the Constitution said, Article 1, Section 8, that monetary matters should be kept under control of the Congress, and that they would establish the minting of the money and what the value of it would be. Hamilton came along and he said, we ought to let the private banks do that. And we've had that fight going on ever since. When Joseph Smith was running for president, he said, let me tell you what's going to happen. If you don't get this monetary thing back in the hands of the people's representatives with their bank, etc., there's going to be real difficulty. And the money will be debauched, and you won't know whether you've got any savings or not, because it will be just paper money that they could announce as valueless at any time. He said, you ought to have $1 worth of metal back of every piece of paper that's circulating. Anyway, he gave us some good counsel. Well, of course, this is all out the window. This is really passé. And we got a whole new approach. We got paper gold now. You may not have heard that. Try to give it to your girlfriend for an engagement ring. See how she buys it. But anyway, paper gold now, that's the big thing. All these principles have been so badly scrambled that it has left our people in confusion. So back in 1960, President McKay tried to get all the MIAs to study these issues, and it split wards wide open. Our people were so unprepared to talk about issues on the basis of principle that they would begin pointing fingers and quarreling, and it began to split the wards. So by 1966, President McKay issued this statement to the priesthood, and I just want you to hear it. The church, out of respect for the rights of all its members to have their various views and loyalties, must maintain the strictest possible neutrality. We'd waited too long. And then he said, we wish all of our citizens, not just members of the church, we wish all of our citizens throughout the land were participating in some type of organized self-education in order that they could better appreciate what is happening and know what they can do about it. Now, those of us that had the great pleasure of knowing President McKay well and being able to talk to him on occasion, we knew his feelings. He said, the adversary is closing in now very fast. And right at the time when our people are getting sufficiently mature to maybe set up little islands, little Zion cities, the whole frame of reference provided by the Constitution is beginning to close in on us, so that it would be illegal to do what the Lord said to do for prosperity and happiness. They're moving in very fast now with very strong controls, so that everything that you do must be in their terms and under their program, and they would not tolerate what the Lord said we eventually must do. So he said, our only hope is to go back into an educational program and reverse the course. So it was a puzzle to a lot of us just how we should do that, and it's taken us a long time to get at it, but we're now at it. And we started, some of you have been with me before, and you know the program we've been following. About a year ago, we set up a Freeman Institute right off campus. I took all my books and all my papers that I'd collected for 30-odd years, put them there where the students could have access to them. And we told both sides. There's the communist side, the socialist side, the liberal side, and the constitutional conservative side. Conservative means conservation, conserving freedom. That's what conservation means. That's what it's supposed to mean. Conserving resources, conserving the best. Doesn't mean don't solve problems. That's a stick in the mud, so forth. But to conserve your freedom and at the same time solve the problems. So each week, as the Freeman Report comes out now, we'll take a major issue every week, and if you'll read it like the sports page, you'll really come up with something. You know how people amaze me. Usually because they don't have sufficient background on these vital issues. They scan them without ever digesting them. And a headline comes out which says, new monetary policy. I've been talking to some of the folks, and that's all they got. There's going to happen something to our money. Did you read the article? No, I didn't have time. Did you read the sports page? Hey, yeah, you know what's... Did you see what's happening down in California? See, we're off. Boy, they digested that page. Okay. Now, I want you to digest this for your sake. I want you to become a constitutionalist. And here's what it is. Here's both sides of the issue. Revenue sharing, the real story. What was promised, what the bills contain, and here are those that favor it, and here are those that say it's terribly dangerous. This page is what the constitutional founding fathers and the church leaders have said on basic constitutional principles that are involved in revenue sharing. Now, that's the hottest issue facing America today. About 1 out of 1,000 knows about it. 1 out of 1,000. We got to increase that percentage. So I'm not at all reluctant to have a person who's for it or a person against it tell his story. I think you have the intelligence to find your way through without any problem. So with a little help, let me just give you each one of these copies, and each week as it comes out, I'll see that you each get one as long as I can afford it. Now, one of the things we try to do in our class is to relate what's in the scriptures to what's happening to us today, and so that's what I'm going to try and do.
Brother Skousen, apropos to this.
It's a good suggestion, and I might even bring it a little closer to home. The 10 Commandments put up by the Eagles Fraternal Association on the public park in Salt Lake City has been ordered removed by a federal judge because he says that it confuses the issue of separating church and state. No church was involved in that at all. And the Supreme Court has now said there must be a separation of religion and state. Religion and state. And Washington said our whole system is built on religion. Don't ever separate religion from our agencies or we will collapse. Now, you've had your hand up several times. Power to the president to negotiate. Oh, yes, but the Constitution didn't mind being changed if you just debate it and think it through. You see, what they're doing is saying, hey, it's for a good cause, go ahead and do it. It's illegal, but go ahead and do it. Go ahead and declare war. Send our troops over abroad. Of course, we haven't declared war, so we won't call it a declared war. Just send over 500,000 boys. See, we've done that twice now. That's a constitutional procedure. Still it might not be all right. We might still find from experience, but at least it went through the process. Now, if you do it by judicial fiat or somebody just feeling pressure, you see, Founding Father says you'll be in trouble most of the time. Okay, way in the back. Oh, yes, thank you. His question was, if Jefferson wanted to buy the Louisiana Purchase, what was the constitutional procedure so that he could do it? Well, it required an amendment, and that meant that it'd have to be debated and discussed. And some people said there just isn't time. You know, you buy a lot of junk that same way. You know, I got a real bargain for you, but I got to have it right now. 50% off. Then you get it home and he leaves and you find out the darn thing wasn't worth 25%. But anyway, the Founding Fathers said, if you're going to do something the Constitution doesn't permit, go through the amendment process so that you get a chance to think it through real well before you shift. Now notice how this is set up. Every one of these articles is documented. That's the whole purpose of this. So you won't be quoting the Freeman Report or Brother Skousen. You'll notice down at the bottom of each article or in the article, it tells you where it came from. This is just so that you'll have in your file what would have taken you several weeks to have accumulated and sifted out of all the papers that are coming through under revenue sharing, pro and con. So that's all been done for you. So don't throw it away. Save it, because Aunt Susie one of these days is going to take issue with you on one side or the other. You say, but Aunt Susie, did you know that? See? And that's what's helpful. Now, here was the original proposal, which said there would be no strings attached, and that sounded pretty good. A lot of conservative people have said there's duplication in collecting taxes. If the government just collected them and then gave them to the states, maybe that would be economical. So that was sort of the way it was originally presented. And then all of a sudden, when I read the bills and saw what they were going to do to the police, to some of your most sensitive services in the community, under whose control the hiring and firing and policies would be dominated, it's a completely different ball of wax. And all I would care about, if the people wanted that, all right, but let's know what we're voting for. That's all this is for. So at least you know what it really says. Now, the papers, for some reason or another, have not succeeded in doing a good job of boiling down issues. Therefore, people in Europe know so much more about political issues than we do in America. You can talk to a cab driver in London, talk about the most technical aspects of their foreign policy. Boy, he's right with you. And he's been reading it. He's been following it for years, you know. It's very serious, you know. And so, well, it is serious. Okay. All right, now, here are what the yes people say. They'll say, you'll get some money back. It's your money. You really ought to have some of it back. Oh, that sounds so good. And these people over here say, yes, but it's an unconstitutional procedure. And number one, you don't have the money. It'll be deficit spending. Number two, this is the wrong procedure. Number three, it helps some people and doesn't help others, and who's to decide who's it's going to help? And this is what the Constitution was designed to avoid. Somebody sitting up with the whip and saying, we like you, you get it. We don't like you, you don't get it. Why don't you like us? Well, here are the reasons. It turns out that you're not cooperating in this tremendous big centralization of authority. That's why they don't like you. It's a real interesting thing. Now, of course, this was advocated by the socialists all along. So over here on page 2, you see down here on this side, you have Kenneth Galbraith, well-known socialist at Harvard, saying, the whole program is so delightful. We're moving, in the name of the conservatives, we're moving hard to the left, fast. Fast. Just wanted you to hear a socialist say it. There it is. Now, on the back page, here's what the Founding Fathers said to be watching out for. Here's what some of the brethren have said. Watch out for certain forces that eventually will destroy our capacity to carry out the church program. And that's all down through here. And here are some constitutional alternatives to revenue sharing. In other words, what else should you do? Okay, it's all wrapped up in one paper for you. Now, it's only one issue. You notice that? Only one issue is dealt with here. One critical issue. Now, next week, you'll get another critical issue, and you'll put that in the file, too. And by the time that you have, you've gone through this a couple of months, you'll find yourself pulling this out a dozen times because the subject comes up. And if you'll force yourself to read it like the sports page, I want you to notice what happens to your brain. All of a sudden, you stop saying, well, hey, isn't it so-and-so? Or I understood it was such and so. I heard a commentator say so-and-so. You don't do that anymore. All of a sudden, you start speaking in specifics. You say, do you know what that bill actually provides? Well, I haven't read the bill. Well, I read an analysis of it. It's on page 3 of the Freeman Report. And it says so-and-so and so-and-so. And it actually says they will have the control over the police. And in fact, if you take that money, which is only 10% of the average budget of a city, and put it in with your general funds, the federal auditors get full control of the whole fund and the policies by which it is expended. It's the neatest little package of this you ever saw. And it's in there. Okay, read it like a sports page. Digest the scores. You know, you do that all the time. You remember how many errors there were, how many hits, how many runs? Okay. Do it for vital issues. You'll become a great constitutionalist. Let me tell you what our objective is. We're starting a series of constitutional seminars very shortly. They're all on cassette tape and film strip. So anybody can get 20 friends in their house and present one. But you have homework in connection with it. And you have to send the homework into the Freeman Institute. And after you've taken 8 and gone all through the Constitution and how its principles apply to solving our modern-day problems, you get a certificate, which says your brain was at least exposed to what the Founding Fathers were talking about. That's all it certifies to, but it does certify to that, which will be more than 1 out of every 10,000 have gone through. I'm a political science major, I know. I got clear up in law school before I really understood the Constitution or appreciated it. Then we're going to get competent people to start running for office in all parties as constitutionalists. Run as constitutionalists. Now, that's the way to save the Constitution while there's still time, while you can still vote. Become a constitutionalist, run for public office, or support somebody else who's running for public office who's a constitutionalist. And as Dr. Quigley said in his book, if the middle-class America ever wakes up to what's being done to them, they could upset this beautiful thing that's being built. They could upset it so tremendously. And that's our intent, you see. That's our intent. Because they're gradually pulling in now, and they're saying, we've got to help the poor, give us more power. We've got to help the unemployed, give us more power. Got to help the students, more power. Got to help the colleges, more power. Got to help the labor unions, more power. Well, they all need help. There's a constitutional way to do it so they stay free and get help. And it really doesn't take any longer. But anyway, that's what this fight is all about. And our saints were very dilatory in this. We needed direction mostly. And the church is always so successful in its program, we just wish they could take over. It's too late now. Everything must be done independent of the church. In fact, they're closing in on the church in every way they can. Tried to take away all our radio and television stations. In 2 suits we just won. Tried to start taxing our property. And fortunately, we got by this. What about next time, you see? What about next time? Keep closing in. This is a power establishment that's been built up over a period of about 75 to 80 years. I call it the big monopoly. They are bankers, industrial leaders, the world's largest industrial leaders, and their power structure in government, BIG. It's the big monopoly. They've got both our major political parties now. They have most of our press, radio, television. ABC is the one television network which is not entirely under their control. And recently I heard someone from CBS talking to a man who knew about the conspiracy. And he said, "Are you trying to tell me that the various television networks are under a supervisory control, a censoring control that slants things?" And this man he said, "Yes, and yours is the worst. CBS is the very worst." And this fellow just kind of rocked back. It was Meet the Press or Face the Nation, I guess it was Face the Nation. Just rocked him back. He had nothing to say. Because there are a lot of good people in CBS. But their reports have been biased for years. Whole books have been written on it now. And it got so bad that Mr. Agnew stepped out into the limelight to point it out to people and immediately became famous. Right. The liberals say it's not slanted enough. That's right. That's right. Well, actually, this really isn't a contest between liberals and conservatives, because I would like to be identified with the people that want to help the poor, that want to help the minorities, that want to solve our problems, better streets. See, the church stands for that. The church is a problem-solving institution that wants to conserve our freedom. So we don't divide into conservative and liberal. What we really divide up into is, will you do it the constitutional way, or are you going to cut across and do it the collectivist way, which is give us power and we'll compel the stupid masses to do what's good for them. See, that's what Plato said. And that's what Marx said, and that's what the socialists say. But what I wanted to get over to you now is that this wonderful society that Enoch was talking about has been re-revealed in our time with the possibility of setting it up again. And Lucifer is rapidly dismantling the whole framework of freedom in which you're allowed to do it. He's also dismantling the framework of freedom in which the missionaries can properly function. And he succeeded in doing it in Mexico, and we had to therefore do it in the name of the Mutual Improvement Association. The government said, well, I guess that's all right. So we built colleges and built chapels and ran the whole church program in the name of the Mutual Improvement Association, which we do today. Just had the world's largest Mormon conference, 18,000 people, under the Mutual Improvement Association of Mexico. And 7 stakes have been set up under the Mutual Improvement Association. So we wouldn't dare say anything in Mexico about the hardcore revolutionary power that exists in that government, or the collectivists that have gained control over many of the people. The thing that the Mexican government is impressed with is the fact we don't take money out of Mexico, we bring it in. And we're teaching the people to read. Their homes are cleaner. They make better workmen. They stop getting drunk every Saturday. And it's improving the culture. So they know exactly what we're doing, but wink at it. Because they like what we're doing. They like the fruits. Real interesting. So the church really is being very tightly closed in now. And I'm so appreciative of President Lee. When they give him the most delicate question that one might ask, he turns it around and answers it in a way that gets a whole column of publicity and does a beautiful job of it. For example, the United Press recently asked him, what about the Negro and the priesthood? And he said, well, as far as the church is concerned, it's just a matter of time till the Negro gets the priesthood. He's ingenious on that. That's always been the doctrine. They're not forever forbidden from the priesthood. The Lord said that they turned it down in the pre-existence, 13th chapter of Alma, and declined the service. Therefore, they are not allowed to have it here, but they have a chance to go clear to the top of the celestial kingdom if they'll just be valiant here. That's all it's all about. So if you read the article carefully, all of that's in President Lee's statement. And he said this is completely dependent upon revelation, has nothing to do with us as members of the church. We couldn't possibly change it if we wanted to. It's entirely in the hands of the Lord. And what did they headline? What did the headline say? Mormon priesthood for Negroes, merely a matter of time. Well, that's all the liberals have been chanting on. Thank goodness it's merely a matter of time, you see. It never was anything but a matter of time. Well, I think I mentioned to you the other day, didn't I, that when he was in Mexico, they asked him about the Vietnam War. Did I tell you about that? They asked him about the Vietnam War. Well, you could get in all kinds of trouble talking about the pros and cons. That's way too complex to answer, in 2 sentences. So what does he do? He says, let me tell you about war. War is a terrible thing. And in the sight of God, it never should be used to settle political and economic problems. But if a person is attacked and his liberty and his life is at stake, he has a duty to God to defend his wives and his children and his liberty and his basic rights. His duty to God to do it. But he said, if you want to know when peace will come to the earth, let me tell you when it's going to come. When the pure love of Jesus Christ enters the hearts of men, they will find that whether they're Arabs or Jews or North Vietnam or South Vietnam, they can live together as brothers, and we can achieve universal peace and universal prosperity. And that's what the Mormon Church is doing, spreading the pure love of Jesus Christ. And here these fellows are writing. This is just tremendous. This is great. Never mentioned the Vietnam War, really. He talked about war. Every time they ask him about a question, he tells them about the gospel. Now they ask him about abortion. He says, let me tell you about that. I saw the report in the Los Angeles paper. 3 solid columns. No president of the church ever got that kind of write-up. 3 solid columns on his comments on various issues. So they said, what about abortion? I said, let me tell you about that. The sanctity of life is so precious in the eyes of God and his church that there is never any excuse for destroying life unless another life is in danger, such as the mother. He said, we agree 100% with the Catholic Church on the position that abortion is a sin in the eyes of God. Why? Because of the sanctity of life. I said, there's only one time when it's excused. Well, of course, there's a Catholic nation. Oh, that really went down in the paper. Tremendous amount of coverage on the Mormon position agrees with the Catholic position that in the sight of God, abortions are sin. I got a big write-up. Doesn't matter what they ask him. He tells them about the gospel. The Lord really has blessed him with the capacity to do that. Well, now, I just wanted you to get better acquainted with Enoch and not think of the law of consecration as something that just existed in the past, or it's supposed to be restored before the millennium. It's going to be restored among the saints either here, or if we don't win and there has to be a wiping out of the American civilization or the Gentile civilization, and we go back to Missouri when there's not even a yellow dog to wag its tail, it'll be lived then, but it's going to be lived before the millennium. And nobody's authorized to live it until the prophet of God authorizes it. They tried to do it down at, what creek was it down here they tried it? They got Short Creek and a few other places, but it never works out successfully, and that's because it isn't under proper priesthood supervision. Now, at the height of Enoch's career, the very height of his career, they had this marvelous convention at Adam-on-Diamond, and all of the members of the church went back to Adam-on-Diamond from the city of Enoch, whether it was in the Gulf of Mexico or in the eastern part of the United States, wherever it was, they all went back to Adam-on-Diamond. They met in that magnificent valley that you can visit today, and there this aged 927-year-old man, it says, bent with age, stood up before them, and these are all his children, and I suppose Mother Eve was there, I hope she was, and he was able to give those who were his direct descendants their particular patriarchal blessing so the patriarchal priesthood could continue. And it was in the midst of that conference, as they were giving their various reports, that there suddenly came through the veil the great Jehovah, who stood there, the Spirit of Jesus Christ, Jehovah, stood there, and to the amazement of the people as they saw this glorious being, he pointed to Father Adam and said, there was your leader in the pre-existence in the war in heaven. This man that you call Father and Adam is actually Michael. You knew about Michael. This is he. He led you then, and you supported my proposal rather than Lucifer's. And you are supporting it now, and I bless you for it. And then all of a sudden, Adam's mind was open, and he saw a projection clear down to the end of the millennium. Oh, he rejoiced how in the end God's great work would prevail. And when that conference was finished, Adam survived just 3 more years. And Seth also died before the city of Enoch was translated. And when the city of Enoch was translated, look who was left: Enos, Canaan, Mahalalel, Methuselah, and Lamech. And then 2 years after the translation of the city of Enoch, little Noah was born. Now, Enoch saw Noah and his time in vision. In fact, just before the translation of the city of Enoch, there was this wonderful vision in which Enoch got to see the whole history of the world. And it's interesting how it was unfolded to him a little bit at a time. He saw all these multitudes, and I've shown you in your book how they could have been a much bigger population than the earth has today. And he saw them covering and teeming off across the earth, and he looked at the Savior, or Jehovah, and saw him looking at it and weeping. And he looked back. Gee, they're prosperous, beautiful cities, chariots, wonderful. Why are you weeping? You're God. You're in the first presidency of heaven. What's the problem? And he said, you see those? In all my creations, I've never had any as wicked as those. What do you mean, wicked? They look like they're doing so well. Let me show you their personal lives. Enoch couldn't believe it. Perversion, debauchery, animalistic things that even animals wouldn't think of. Why, he turned to God and he said, why, they ought to be wiped off the face of the earth. The debauchery of the earth that they are creating. They ought to be wiped off the earth. And Jehovah said, I sort of had that in mind. And then he showed him the great flood, and that really was a source of sorrow to Enoch. He wiped them all out, practically, just 8 people left. And then Enoch said, now what happens? Well, now watch them. They'll go out across the earth, and you'll see it build up again. Then he watched the coming of Christ, Christ's crucifixion. That really was a heartbreak. All this was kind of a surprise to Enoch in a way. All these details had been shown other prophets, but just couldn't believe it. And then he saw the great apostasy after Christ's time. He saw the Dark Ages. He saw the Renaissance, then the Reformation, then the Restoration, and then the Millennium. And we're probably just, 30, 40 years away from it. We're right up against it now. And I'll tell you, Lucifer's pulling all the stops. And he's trying to get you so choked down so that you won't be able to raise your children the way you want to. They will be required to attend schools where they're taught things that you don't want them taught. In fact, they will be taken away from you if he has his way, so that you won't even be able to tell them about the gospel. That's his plan. And you happen to have the responsibility to prevent it. It's going to be a real battle. Okay. See you Tuesday. Now, we have some goodies for you today we'll be passing out. These cost 25 cents last year, and I went ahead and just bought up a lot of them so that you could have them for nothing. And this will give you background on the ark, the ruins of the ark that they think they've discovered up on the traditional Mount Ararat. While they're passing these out, are any of you from Ricks College? Any of you from Ricks? We have several. Good. Idaho Falls, Rexburg, etc. Anyway, I bring you greetings from Ricks. I spoke at the devotional on Tuesday, and about 4,000 students turned out and just packed the auditorium, and they were just great. They're very much like BYU in every respect, except there aren't so many of them, which has some advantages and possibly some handicaps, but they've got a lovely campus, and I've always been impressed with the spirit of that student body and faculty up there. If President McKay had had his way, we'd have now about a dozen of those colleges. But we never could get unanimity, and President McKay said he would wait on the brethren that felt like that was just too much money to spend. President McKay said, well, you can't afford not to spend it, really. But he said, I will wait till there's unanimity. And there never was quite. I've lived long enough to realize the Lord's problem with the church. Waiting, waiting, waiting. for them to catch up with himself and his prophets. He knows what's good for us. It's just like when he told the people of Jerusalem at the time of Jeremiah, I've got it all set up. The prime minister of Babylon is one of your own people. The 3 mayors of Babylon are your own people. Now, will you stop supporting Egypt and get behind this movement, because you will survive? I can bring you through the crisis. No, King Zedekiah says we are going the other route. And they really did. Ended up in disaster and went to Babylon as captives, those who survived. The Lord's always trying to do good for us. And he wanted to expand our educational program. The prophet of the Lord had to wait on the church. And the church never quite caught up. A few did, but not enough. Well, there's some merit to that. In other words, we don't want to gather all our people into LDS communities. See, there's been a division on whether we should risk our young people in the missionary effort, and it's a real risk. Our casualty rate is terrific when our young people go to non-LDS institutions. Our casualty rate is very high. Or whether we should gather them together, make them a strength, and then let them go forward. So we're trying it both. We've tried it both ways. But anyway, I've watched the prophet try to lead the church, and the church will not keep up with him. And those that support the prophet, by and large, a great many of them come from institutions of learning such as BYU and Rick's College, a lot of others too. But I mean, basically, we turn out about an 85% support team for the prophet of the Lord from BYU. They pay their tithes. They go on missions. They remain morally clean. They avoid drugs. They live honest lives. They earn a living. They raise a fine big family. We have about a 15% casualty rate. This is a pure guess on my part, but based on our past experience, this has been about the way it runs. And as I tell my students, I don't want any of them to be casualties. There are some, but I hope it won't be any of my students or anybody I know. I don't want anybody to be a casualty if I could help it. But in any event, I was surely impressed with that visit, and I appreciated your patience with me not being present. I understand you had a little problem with the recorder on the film. Did you in this class, or was it the other one? Was it hard to understand? A little hard to understand? I don't know why that should be. It must have been the tape, because the recorder, I've just tested it. It's perfectly all right. But something happened. Now, if you'll take this brochure that you have, don't lose this, by the way. We brought these people to our campus so that our students could hear the scientists that went up on this expedition in '69. And a film was made of it on videotape as I interviewed them on a night program for 1 hour, and then somebody unfortunately erased it. So they showed it a dozen times, I suppose, but then somebody got overenthusiastic and erased it and wasn't interested in the ark, and so down the tube it went. But I just wanted you to hear this story, because beginning way back in the days of Josephus, we had a whole list of historians who had described going up and seeing the ruins of the ark. Now, Josephus is about 90 A.D., 70 to 90 A.D., and he wrote his History of the Jews, and he said to the Romans, of course, and that's who he was writing for, the History of the Jews for the Romans, he said, of course, if you didn't believe in the great universal flood, all you'd have to do is go up on Mount Ararat and see the ruins of it. And from century to century, we have the same thing happening. Marco Polo, in the 13th century, went up and saw it. He'd been to China. He thought he ought to go up Mount Ararat and see the ark. So he saw it. And then from century to century, a few people were able to get up. Now, it's very difficult to get up to where it is, because all of the rock surface of the mountain is covered with ice. And then a little bit of debris or tundra will come down on top of the ice, so it looks like dirt. So you go to step on it, and down comes about 6 inches of rock and dirt from up above, and you're right on slick, solid ice. So to get up that side of the mountain is a very perilous ascent, and very few actually have gone up. Now, it's quite easy to go up the other side of the mountain and to go way on around and come around to where this ruin is located. But it's still up pretty high. You see, you get up around 14,000 feet, 13,500 feet, and you have to get up 14,000 to come on around to come on down. You'll notice even on top of Mount Timpanogos, you're a little huffy and puffy. So there aren't very many people that have ascended this. And I just wanted you to see what they had accomplished. I think if you look at the front, that's a good place first. The search team in a major crevasse, which was much larger and deeper in 1955 when Fernand Navarra saw an estimated 50 tons of hand-hewn beams. Now, he actually photographed them. They were about 140 feet long. He would photograph them through the ice, and the ice had broken away so he could get right down among the timbers, and he chopped off about a 5-foot length of one of them and brought it out. None of those countries will let you take artifacts. So he had to chop it up and make it look like firewood and put it in his knapsack as firewood, and the guards let him out with it. And over here on this side, you see some of this wood. And they've attempted to carbon date it, but it was not a successful effort, and the scientists explained a number of technical reasons which were beyond me. So they just said that the carbon dating was almost 800 to 1,000 years apart by different institutes, so that didn't help at all. But notice down at the bottom picture, you see that's hewn timber, and it's soaked in tar, and it's made into a great multitude of rooms that you can see. And in 1938, one of the British spies, escaped from the Nazis and came right over that mountain and ran into it and thought it was just an old hunting lodge or something from a long time ago, and the whole end of the ark was above the ice. It was one of those warm summers, and he thought it was a hotel or a fortress or a lodge or something of the ancient past. Just a lot of rooms, that's all he could see, going down into the ice. Well, actually, Mount Ararat, which is located right up here, you see, here's Turkey. It's old Anatolia. It used to be called Anatolia. This is the tallest, highest mountain in this range between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. And it's always been called Mount Ararat. And it used to have, in Josephus's day, it had a little village at the bottom, and it was called the place of first descent. I wrote all that up for you in your text. Noah and his people, if this is Mount Ararat, and you'll notice that the Bible says mountains in the plural of Ararat, but the inspired version says, no, there was a mountain of Ararat. The range was called something else, just like Sinai is a mount on the Horeb range. So this was the mount, and it's the only mountain that goes way, way up, 17,000 feet high. And it's shaped somewhat like this. Comes up like so. It has a sort of a shelf there, and it goes up higher to 17,000 feet. Then it slopes way off down over there, and it's quite easy to ascend on that side. But this is all ice and snow up here. And right in here is this little lake. And right in the bottom of that, and rested right down in it, is the ark. If it is the ark. And Joseph Fielding Smith said to them after he'd watched the film, he said to Dr. Crawford, well, don't be surprised if it turns out to be the ark. Because he's always felt the flood was universal, and that this would be no wonder to him at all, and of course wouldn't to most of us. Now, they went back up in 1970. You notice up here it says expedition to return in 1970. They went back up, and the Russian government flew helicopters over, saw them working there, decided they were spies, because over on that side of the mountain is Russia, just across the river. There's a little valley there in the river, and on the other side is Russia. I don't know how they could spy from over here. But ever since we removed our missiles that were originally put there, Turkey has stopped standing up to Russia. Turkey feels that we have really abandoned all of our allies to the communists one at a time, Taiwan being the latest one to be abandoned, that the people who've got in charge of our government who actually are pro-communist or are determined to work out a great world society in which the communist idea of collectivized dictatorship will control. They're convinced that we've given up, at least our leadership has, no matter which party is elected. And all of our history demonstrates that their deduction is correct. And that's why I wrote The Naked Capitalist, to give people a little background on what's been happening and how we lost control of our two parties. In any event, Turkey now is scared to death of Russia because she knows she does not have the backing of the United States any more than Taiwan does. And while we keep talking brave, we keep removing our missiles and our troops. So they just realize that they probably are being sacrificed. So the Turks pulled this expedition right off. And Dr. Crawford called me on the phone recently, and he said, and now we may get to go up next summer as agents of the Turkish government. They'll hire us, and then they'll say to Russia, we're doing the digging. We're doing it. And he says we might get away with that because the Turkish government has told us they want to have it dug up, but they don't know how to get rid of the ice. And they had some experts from Michigan State and several other universities that have worked out a system that will melt ice very fast by a chemical process. Quite expensive, but they have the money, they think, to achieve it. And if they can get down far enough so they can start photographing and seeing it, why, then they think they'll be on the way. Now, nobody now available to us other than Fernand Navarra, whose picture you see here. He's the last one now available to us who's seen any amount of the timbers and been close enough when the ice was fairly low down so that you could get some idea of the inside. So he made a miniature ark, and Michael, you notice how much this is like yours. You've both come to a very similar conclusion. That's kind of exciting to look at it, and the inspired version contradicts the King James Version. The inspired version says there were windows all along the upper deck. The King James says there was a window, but it's plural in the inspired version, and I'm very happy for that because I have worked stock trains before, and I recommend lots of windows, lots of windows. And so it does appear that the ark did have lots of windows. So that fits. Now, if you'll just put that in your file, you're going to have other people ask you about it and ask you about its history. And now whole books are being written on this subject. But that's one of the best little summaries that I can recommend to you to give you an idea on the background of the expedition up Mount Ararat. Now, I want you to keep in mind that this is 13,500 feet above sea level. There are no trees for hundreds of miles around here, and some of those timbers are 140 feet long, which means those were tremendous trees that they were cut from. All right, now, if you'll get out your notebook, I want to go through the life of Noah and have you tell me what happened on certain dates. You will notice that the dating system in the first 2,000 years is based on modern revelation from father to son so that we can fix the date of the flood with remarkable accuracy. After Abraham, we're in trouble. Clear down to 600 BC, which is the next inspired, revealed date that's given of the Lord. Between 2000 BC and 600 BC, it's pretty speculative, but within 10 to 20 years. It's not too far off. But the Bible is not clear on Abraham. But everything before Abraham is right on the nubbin. And the Lord says in the book of Revelation and the 88th section that he's done everything in segments of 1,000 years apiece, that the human story is 7,000 years long, which would lead us to rather contradict Bishop Ussher of Ireland, who put Adam's creation at 4,004. I've gone through his chronology. I find no basis at all for his 4,004. I think he wanted to be unique. We put it right at 4,000, and if that's the case, then we can tell you the very year that Noah was born after the fall. So on your sheet, would you put down Noah, born 2944 BC, and then ordained, age, what was it? How old was Noah when he was ordained? You sure? 10. Only one other person ordained to the priesthood younger than Noah. Who was it? John the Baptist at the age of 8 days. 8 days. That's Doctrine and Covenants. Okay. Father Methuselah was left behind by his father. His father Enoch went ahead and got translated, and the whole city went off to another planet where they still remain. Will return to this earth in the next 30 or 40 years, just before the second coming. And Methuselah looks around, and I'm sure he was told in advance that he would be left. He and his son Lamech are left, and his grandfather, Jared, is left. Methuselah's grandfather, Jared, is left. And his grandfather, Mahalalel, was left. And Canaan was left. And Enos was left. And Adam and Seth were dead, or were gone. So Enoch was not allowed to take any of the direct line of patriarchal priesthood with him. He took his whole city, all his relatives, and all the righteous of that time, and left his relatives. Adam, Seth are gone. Enos, Canaan, Mahalaleel, Jared are left, together with Jared's grandson, Methuselah, son of Enoch, and great-grandson Lamech, father of Noah. Noah was born 2 years after the city was translated. Yes. Yes, they're still translated. They'll be resurrected at the time they come back to the earth. They'll be changed in the twinkling of an eye, and never having gone into the grave. And this will happen to John the Beloved and the three Nephites and all the city of Melchizedek and others who've been translated. They have to go through the change yet. Right. But the Doctrine and Covenant says that they will be quickened, that their quickening will be when they return back to the earth. Other questions? All right. Early ministry. Now, this is exciting because you only have one in the whole Scripture, and it's a prophetic verse that tells you about Noah's early ministry. You know nothing about Noah until he was 450 years old from the Bible. That's a long time to live. That's twice as long as the history of the United States that's left out in the Bible concerning the life of this man. And a lot of things happened. Think of all the children he could have had during this time. And all the experiences. So early ministry is in Moses 7:27, where Enoch had seen a vision of the early ministry of Noah and his fathers, and found that everybody, as fast as they were converted to the church, were not organized into wards and stakes. What happened to them? Translated. And so you suddenly had the most powerful, wealthy, vigorous civilization on the face of this planet taken, and nothing left but only a few families, a veritable handful of priesthood leaders whose task was to go out and convert as many as they could. And as fast as they were converted, they were translated. All right, that's a precious passage which very few members of the church even know about. All right, birth of Japheth to Noah. Noah was how old? How old when Japheth was born? You really picked that one up, did you? These are pretty good hook dates. I'd hang on to them because we have so few of them. 450. See, I gave that to you just a minute ago inadvertently. He was 450 when his eldest son was born to him who would go through the flood. All his other children having been translated, now there are born to him in his more or less middle life the three sons that are going to go through with him. All right, the next important date in his life is put 480. And what happened when Noah was 480? He began his mission to the whole world that would last 120 years. 480. 12 years after that, the next great event happened when he was 492. Okay, what happened when he was 492? Our great ancestor Shem was born, after whom all the Semitic or Shemite peoples take their descent. The Arabs are Semitic or Shemites. The Jews are Semites. Many of the ancient peoples that occupied the Mediterranean basin were proud of the fact that they spoke the language of the Shemites and were descendants of the great patriarch Shem. All right, the next. Now, interestingly enough, Shem was what relation to Japheth? Half-brother or full brother? Yes, he had the same mother. She had two children 42 years apart. That's pretty good, isn't it? That reminds me. You want to read an interesting brochure. This is Ensign Magazine. You read this like you read the sports page, and you'll really get something out of it. A lot of people subscribe to this, but very few people read it. It's like the Bible. World's bestseller, but the reading quotient is very low. Okay. In here it tells about this wonderful woman who's the oldest member of the church. She's only a convert of a few years, actually. She's now considerably over 120. She had 24 children, 20 boys and 4 girls. Her last baby was born when she was 65. Now, that's pretty good. She deserved to be a member of the church. And the gospel finally reached her. And there she is in good health, vigor and strength, and a member of the church in Mexico. Now, that whole issue is about Latin America. When I was your age, we only had 10,000 members of the church in all Latin America. Today, we make that many converts in a year. Got stakes blossoming up in Brazil alone, just like mushrooms almost. Every time I turn around, they got a new mission or a new stake in Brazil. I can't believe it. Fantastic how it's growing. All right. Now we go back to this mother that had two children 42 years apart. Okay, when Noah was 500, what happened to him? He had his third son that would go through the flood, whose name was Ham. Now, I just want you to remind you of something. Each one of these three men married a girl who was cut off from her family and who died in the flood. In the book of Moses, it says that Noah was very cross with his sons because their daughters kept growing up and marrying outside of the kingdom, which meant that they too would be destroyed in the flood. If they couldn't convert their husbands, obviously they're going to die in the flood. But their daughters, all their daughters were lost in the flood. All of Noah's granddaughters were lost in the flood. The plural marriage was in force. 132nd section. It says, Adam had many families, and so did Noah and all the ancient patriarchs. From Adam on down, they had plurality of families. Now, which of these boys held the priesthood? Are you sure? All three of them held the priesthood. And later we're told that the Egyptians who descended from Ham would fain have had the priesthood because Ham had it. See, they used Ham as their reason for being entitled to the priesthood. Well, you get the priesthood through worthiness, not just lineage. All right? So Noah is 500, and he has this third son who's going to go through the flood with him, whose name is Ham. All three of these men walked and talked with God. All three of these men were they must have been quite righteous men. Ham kind of falls out of favor with his father and with the Lord after the flood for a little incident that happened, but other than that, they all three were sufficiently righteous to walk and talk with God. Now, the two older sons, Japheth and Shem, married girls who were of the kingdom, either converted them or married someone who didn't get translated or something. But Ham married a beautiful girl who was a descendant of whom? Cain. And she appears to have been a righteous girl. And her name meant forbidden. Now, when Joseph Smith first put her name in, it's a very complicated name. I used to be able to bring it off the top of my head, but I can't today. But then he said the land that we call Egypt was named after her. But nobody would be able to see the connection because the land of Egypt is now changed. So Joseph Smith transliterated the word, as a translator is allowed to do, and gave her the transliterated form of Egyptus, after whom Egypt was named, so that we would get the connection. I'll have to go back and look. Yes, I know it is. But I don't think it was. But I've forgotten. I'm going to have to go back. But these are wonderful, interesting details. If you get into church history and the ancient scripture studies, there are just lots of exciting things here that are hidden away. Now, he married this beautiful girl. She had a daughter, and they named her Egyptus too, because, of course, she would be also of the Canaanite blood. And then the second Egyptus had a son whose name she named Pharaoh. And she took this son down into Egypt. They settled the land, found it underwater when they first got there, but as the water receded, they established a family there, and they gradually populated that area. And they did everything they could, even though they couldn't hold the priesthood, they did everything they could to do it righteously, just like God had said. The original Pharaoh was a very righteous man. But his descendants would fain have claimed the priesthood through Ham. But after that, they would fain have claimed the priesthood through Shem. They switched. They switched. And so the pharaohs began to be called the high priest of Shem, which in Egyptian is Sam. And when Father Lehi was naming his sons, he named one of them Shem, or in the Egyptian form, Sam. That's who Sam was. Sam was the same as Shem. It was not an abbreviation for Samuel. It was a very distinctive Egyptian name which meant Shem. And the Pharaoh said, "And I am the great high priest after the holy order of Shem." Later they called it the order of Melchizedek, and before the flood they called it the order of Enoch. But the scripture says the real name is the holy order of the Son of God. That's the real name of the priesthood. But if you had the priesthood of Enoch, did you have power? Boy, everybody knew what Enoch could do with the priesthood. If you had the priesthood of Shem, were you respected? Everybody appreciated that. And later on, further down the trail, several generations later, we have Melchizedek rise up, and he had so much great priesthood power that out of respect for the name of deity, so they wouldn't have to use it over and over again, they called it the great priesthood of Melchizedek. And when Paul was arguing with the Jews, he said, "You know who this Jesus the Christ was? He was a high priest after the order of Melchizedek." He could have said he was a high priest after his own order, but that wouldn't have meant much, would it? All right. Now there was a hand right up here, yes. Yeah. When you go on a tour with me to Egypt, I'll take you into the mummy room of the Archaeological Museum in Cairo. And there are the mummies from the earliest days in front of you. Dynasty after dynasty of the greedy great ones. And you'll have no problem distinguishing what the early ones were. The word Egypt, you see, is Greek. It is not Egyptian at all. And what does it mean? Black. Dark. Black. So you can see where the pharaohs from dynasty to dynasty changed. Dynasty means a new family, you see. And the early ones, the features are there. You can very definitely tell that they are Hamitic people. Well, he was depicting 1300 BC, you see, and they were white then. In fact, the Libyans had come down. Nearly all of the pharaohs during that period were Libyans. They weren't even Hamitic. Well, you see, by this time, there isn't much difference in the skin coloring by 1300. See, Moses is way down. Cecil B. DeMille picked out a pharaoh about 1350 BC. Actually, Moses was in there at about 1500 BC. But already many of the pharaoh dynastic families, the whole racial pattern had changed. It was highly homogenized. Right. Hand back here. I mean, why did they use Melchizedek? Well, it was, supposing we had a great miracle worker rise in our midst, like an Enoch, for example. He could turn water back against itself, and mountains move from its foundations. The earth would shake, and a whole peninsula shoot up out of the East Sea. And I'm abroad, you see, and they say, "Who are you?" And I say, "Well, I'm Elder Skousen." "What are you preaching for?" "Because I'm under commission to preach." "By whose authority?" "I have the authority after the order of Enoch." "Oh, you do? What have you got to say?" You see, it made a difference. When Melchizedek came along, he became the best-known high priest among all the peoples after the flood. And therefore to say, "And I have the authority after the order of Melchizedek," boy, that meant something. So when Paul talked to the Jews, he said, "That Jesus, the Christ that you crucified, he was a high priest after the order of Melchizedek. That's who you killed." Boy, that meant something. In the book of Hebrews. Yes, the question is, where do we get the statement that the word Sam is the same as Shem? This is in Brother Nibley's book, Introduction to the Book of Mormon. It's also in my book, Hidden Treasures from the Book of Mormon, with sources cited. After the order of Shem or Sam. Yes, they would say that. The Pharaoh would say, "I am the high priest after the holy order of Shem." And that meant, boy, the high order of priesthood. They didn't say Ham anymore, you see, because everybody had recognized Shem as the direct heir to Father Noah. You see, he superseded Japheth, and Japheth became the father of the whom? Father of whom? All the Gentile nations, the Slavic peoples, and the Eastern peoples carry lots of the blood of Japheth in them, and you and I have a lot of the blood of Japheth in us. We came out from among the Gentiles ourselves, out of Gaul and out of Scandinavia and out of Britannia and so forth. So we have a lot of Gentile blood in us, but we have that wonderful strain of Joseph in us too, and that to those people the Lord assigned spirits who would recognize the voice of the Master and respond to the restored message and then be the leaven to help others accept the gospel. As far as we know, the Mongols and the Eastern peoples are Japhethites, as are the Slavic peoples. Now, the original Chinese and Japanese, before the Mongols came in with the very strong DNA genetic that changed a little bit on the eye formation. The Melanesian people, for example, down south that never did mix with the Mongolian tribes, they don't have that. But the Tartars of Russia and others, they have it. So that Mongolian blood is very strong wherever it went. And of course, they, for many centuries, were the rulers of China, and they drifted over into Japan. We have Aryan people as the original founders of Japan. And they're up in the northern island now and living on the caveman level. But they are not of the Melanesian nor the Mongolian strain. They're by themselves. Caucasian strain. So the Mongolian people seem to have been just a special interbreeding until that eye slant which characterizes Oriental people that we speak of, that really is just from one group of people. And as they interbred with the other Melanesians and Japanese and others, they gave that characteristic that is considered typical, just as our Lamanite brethren have a characteristic that's typical. Our Scandinavians, we expect them all to be blonde, and skiers and so forth. And I get over there and I get some little black-headed fellows that are Scandinavians too, and little short ones besides. They're Alpian, actually from the Alpian race. From the Hamitic peoples. With each dynasty, you get a new family. And some of the dynasties, we know who the new order is. And after you get down into about the 6th and 7th and 8th dynasties, already they're admitting that they are mercenaries from outside of Egypt, who came in as warriors and soldiers, fought their way up to the top. The pharaohs became dissipated, and there was a military coup. So you got a new dynasty, a new bloodline, a new set of royalty, and altogether they had about 28 dynasties. Pardon? Right. And you have to be a little bit careful about the color of the hair, because I asked the curator of the museum about that. Nearly all their hair is blonde, even if it's kinky and was once black. It's blonde, and that was done by the embalming fluid. So the color of the hair at this time, even on the mummies, is not singular. Yeah, that's right. The features change. You can watch them. Those early dynasties are very obviously Hamitic. And then they change to the other character. You can just see them lying there in their beds and in their glass cases and see the change. Now, I just have 2 minutes. Will you put down these additional dates? Noah lost his father. The death of Lamech occurred when Noah was 595. And Methuselah died when Noah was 600. And when Methuselah died, what did this say to Noah? The flood comes this year. Because that's what his name meant. With his death come the great floods. And then the ark was finished that year, and the great flood commenced that year. So that was a real interesting affair. Now, those are just a few of the little technicalities I wanted to get across, and I'm going to catch up with you in our next lecture on Tuesday. I want you to remember that as soon as we are finished with the first 2,000 years, you'll get your examination. So I'd be going back and reviewing your chapters every once in a while, kind of keep up.